The blood-red sun hung low over the dusty horizon as Penelope Foster stumbled into Deming, New Mexico territory, her once fine dress torn and her face streaked with tears and trail dust. It was 1878, and the small mining town sprawled before her like a mirage, its wooden buildings shimmering in the late afternoon heat. She clutched a crumpled letter in her trembling hand, the last reminder of the father who had gambled her away to settle a debt before disappearing into the vast wilderness of the frontier. Penelope's legs nearly gave out as she approached the town's only saloon, the Blue Cactus. The journey from Santa Fe had drained what little strength she had left. 3 days of hitching rides on wagons and walking when no ride was available had left her exhausted. Her stomach growled painfully. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning when a kind family had shared their breakfast. The swinging doors of the saloon parted as a tall figure stepped out. His broad shoulders filled the doorframe, and the setting sun glinted off the silver star pinned to his leather vest. Blake Zimmerman, the town sheriff, paused when he spotted Penelope. His eyes, blue as a summer sky, widened with concern. "Miss, you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and gentle. Penelope's vision swam. The world tilted sideways and she felt herself falling. Strong arms caught her before she hit the dirt. "Someone get Doc Miller." Blake called out, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. When Penelope awoke, she found herself on a narrow bed in a small but tidy room. A gray-haired man with spectacles perched on his nose stood beside her, putting away medical instruments. "Ah, you're back with us," he said kindly. "I'm Dr. Miller. You gave Sheriff Zimmerman quite a scare, young lady." "Where am I?" Penelope asked, her throat dry. "Sheriff's office. There's a small room in the back for folks who need a place to stay." "I've given you something to help with the exhaustion, but what you really need is food and rest." The door opened, and Blake Zimmerman entered, carrying a tray with a bowl of stew and bread. The aroma made Penelope's stomach rumble loudly. "Figured you might be hungry," he said, setting the tray down beside her. "Mind if I ask your name, miss? And what brings you to Deming in such a state?" Penelope hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but something in the sheriff's honest face made her trust him. "Penelope Foster," she said. "I've come from Santa Fe. I'm looking for a man named Victor Holloway." Blake's expression darkened. "Holloway, the gambler. You know him." "Everyone around these parts knows Holloway. He owns the Silver Creek Ranch outside of town. Not the sort of man a young woman should be seeking out alone." Penelope's hands trembled as she took a spoonful of stew. "I don't have a choice. My father. He lost everything to Holloway in a poker game 6 months ago, our home, our savings, and then he wagered me." The words caught in her throat. "He sold me to pay his debt." "I received a letter from Holloway last week, saying it was time to collect." Blake's jaw tightened, and his hand instinctively moved to the pistol at his hip. "No man has the right to sell another human being, debt or no debt. According to the letter, he has a contract with my father's signature. He expects me to work at his ranch as his companion." Penelope couldn't bring herself to say the rest. "Where's your father now?" "Gone. Left a note saying he couldn't face me. I haven't seen him since." Blake stood and paced the small room. "This isn't right." "Contract or no contract, what Holloway's proposing is against the law. But what can I do? I have nowhere to go. My father sold our home. I have no other family." Blake stopped pacing and looked at her with determined eyes. "You'll stay here in town. I'll speak to Mrs. Reynolds. She runs the boarding house. She's always looking for help. And what about Holloway? He'll come looking for me." "Let him come," Blake said, his voice resolute. "Then I'll pay heaven to keep you from that man." Penelope felt a flutter in her chest at his words. For the first time since receiving Holloway's letter, she felt something other than despair. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." "Because it's the right thing to do," he replied simply. "And in Deming, we look after our own." The next morning, Blake escorted Penelope to Lily Reynolds' boarding house, a two-story structure with a freshly painted white fence and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. Reynolds, a plump widow with kind eyes, welcomed Penelope with open arms after hearing a carefully edited version of her story. "Of course she can stay," Mrs. Reynolds said. "I need help with the cooking and cleaning anyway. The miners and cowboys who board here have the appetites of bears after hibernation." "She'll be safe here?" Blake asked. "As safe as in your jail, Sheriff." "No one crosses Lily Reynolds in her own house." The woman patted the pocket of her apron where Penelope suspected she kept a small firearm. Blake tipped his hat. "I'll come by later to check on things. In the meantime, I need to pay a visit to Silver Creek Ranch." "Be careful," Penelope said, touching his arm. "Holloway is dangerous." "So am I when someone threatens the peace in my town," Blake replied with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As the days passed, Penelope settled into life at the boarding house. Mrs. Reynolds was a fair employer, and Penelope found comfort in the routine of making beds, preparing meals, and listening to the boarder stories. She began to recognize the regulars: a grizzled old miner named Ferguson, a cattle broker named Wilson who passed through once a month, and a young telegraph operator named Thomas who took his meals at the boarding house. But she couldn't shake the shadow that hung over her. Each day, she waited for Holloway to appear, to claim what he believed was rightfully his. Blake visited often, sometimes just to share a cup of coffee on the porch, sometimes to bring news. He had ridden out to Silver Creek Ranch, only to find Holloway away on business in El Paso. He was expected back any day. One evening, as Penelope sat on the porch shelling peas, Blake arrived looking troubled. "Holloway returned today," he said without preamble. Penelope's hands stilled. "Did you speak with him?" "I did. Showed him the law books that say a person can't be traded like cattle. He laughed and showed me the contract your father signed." Blake's expression was grim. "It's worded carefully. Says you agreed to work for him to settle your father's debt. Nothing explicit about the nature of the work." "But I never agreed to anything. I never even saw this contract until I received his letter." "I know," Blake said, sitting beside her. "But your father signed your name. The contract looks legal on the surface. So there's nothing you can do." Penelope felt the fragile hope she'd been nurturing begin to crumble. "I didn't say that." Blake took her hand, his calloused fingers warm against her skin. "I've sent telegrams to the federal marshal in Santa Fe, and I've got a deputy watching Holloway's movements. But until we hear back, we need to be careful. Holloway knows you're in town. He's given me 3 days to deliver you to him before he comes to collect himself." "3 days," Penelope whispered. "3 days to find a solution," Blake corrected. "I won't let him take you, Penelope. I promise you that." The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. In the short time she'd known him, Blake Zimmerman had shown her more kindness and respect than any man she'd ever met. She found herself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar above his right eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "Why are you looking at me like that?" he asked. "I'm trying to understand you," she admitted. "Most men would have handed me over to Holloway without a second thought. A woman traded to settle a debt. It happens all the time out here." "Not in my town," Blake said firmly. "And not to you." The way he said "you" made her heart skip a beat. The next morning, Penelope was kneading bread dough in the boarding house kitchen when Mrs. Reynolds rushed in, her face pale. "Holloway's men are in town," she hissed. 3 of them, asking questions at the general store." Penelope's hands froze mid-knead, flour dusting her forearms. Blake said we had 3 days. Well, it seems Holloway isn't a patient man. You need to hide. Where? Mrs. Reynolds thought for a moment. The cellar. No one knows about the root cellar entrance behind the woodpile out back. Go now, quickly. Penelope wiped her hands and hurried through the back door. She had just reached the woodpile when she heard men's voices approaching from around the house. With no time to move the wood, she darted behind the large oak tree at the edge of the property instead. Mrs. Reynolds, a deep voice called. Fine day, isn't it? Penelope peeked around the tree to see 3 men standing on the porch. The one who had spoken was tall and elegantly dressed, with a black hat and a silver-handled cane. Victor Holloway. She recognized him from a fleeting glimpse in Santa Fe years ago when he'd first begun gambling with her father. "What brings you here, Mr. Holloway?" Mrs. Reynolds asked coolly. "I'm looking for a young woman, Penelope Foster. I believe she's staying here." "And what business would you have with her?" Holloway twirled his cane. "She and I have an arrangement, a contract, you might say. Her father and I came to an understanding." "Did you now?" Mrs. Reynolds crossed her arms. "Well, I don't know anything about that. And even if I did, I wouldn't discuss the whereabouts of a young woman with men who come looking for her without proper introduction." One of Holloway's companions, a burly man with a scar across his nose, stepped forward threateningly. "Listen, lady, that's far enough," came Blake's voice as he rounded the corner, his hand resting on his pistol. "Mrs. Reynolds isn't in the habit of handing over her boarders to just anyone who asks." Holloway's smile didn't waver. "Sheriff Zimmerman, I thought we had an understanding." 3 days, you said." "I said I'd look into your claim. I didn't promise to deliver anyone to you. The contract is legal and binding. A contract signed under duress or fraudulently isn't worth the paper it's written on," Blake replied. "And a contract that essentially sells a person is against federal law." Holloway's smile faded. "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff. This is between me and Edgar Foster's daughter. Everything in Deming concerns me. Now, I suggest you and your men return to your ranch. When I have news from the federal marshal, I'll ride out to see you." For a tense moment, it seemed Holloway might challenge Blake. Then he laughed softly. "Very well. I can be patient when the prize is worth waiting for." He tipped his hat to Mrs. Reynolds. "Madam." As they walked away, Holloway turned back. 3 more days, Sheriff. Then I'll take what's mine with or without your blessing." Once they were out of sight, Penelope emerged from her hiding place, her legs shaking so badly she had to lean against the tree for support. "You all right?" Blake asked, quickly moving to her side. She nodded, though she felt anything but all right. "What do we do now?" "Now," Blake said, his eyes scanning the road where Holloway had disappeared. "We come up with a plan." That evening, Mrs. Reynolds and Penelope gathered in the boarding house kitchen after the other boarders had retired for the night. "I've been thinking," Blake said. "The problem is the contract. If we can prove it was signed fraudulently, we can void it." "But how?" Penelope asked. "My father isn't here to testify that he forged my signature, and I doubt Holloway would admit to accepting a fraudulent document." "What if we could find your father?" Blake suggested. "Do you have any idea where he might have gone?" Penelope shook her head. "His note just said he was heading west, that he couldn't face the shame of what he'd done." Mrs. Reynolds, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "There is another way." Both Penelope and Blake turned to her. "If Holloway's claim is based on the contract with your father, then his claim would be void if—" She hesitated. "If what?" Penelope prompted. "If you were married to someone else." Mrs. Reynolds looked meaningfully at Blake. "A husband's claim would supersede any contract made by a father." Blake's face flushed slightly. "Mrs. Reynolds, I don't think. It wouldn't have to be real," the older woman continued. Just on paper to protect Penelope until we can resolve this properly. Penelope stared at her hands, her cheeks burning. I couldn't ask that of the sheriff. You're not asking, Blake said quietly. I'm offering. Her head snapped up to meet his gaze. What? If it will keep you safe from Holloway, I'll do it. His voice was firm, but she could see uncertainty in his eyes. Unless the idea is distasteful to you. No, she said quickly. It's not that, but your reputation, your position in town, are less important than your safety, he finished. We can have Reverend Jones perform a civil ceremony tomorrow, just the paperwork, nothing more. When this is over, we can have it annulled. Penelope looked from Blake to Mrs. Reynolds, who was watching them with a knowing smile. You really think this will work? It's our best chance, Blake said. Holloway is a dangerous man, but even he won't openly challenge a legal marriage. Then, yes, Penelope decided. I accept your offer, Sheriff Zimmerman. The following morning, Penelope stood in Mrs. Reynolds' bedroom, wearing a borrowed dress of pale blue calico. It was simpler than what she would have chosen for her wedding day in another life, but it was clean and pretty, with lace at the collar and cuffs. You look lovely, Mrs. Reynolds said, adjusting the small bunch of wildflowers she had pinned to Penelope's upswept hair. Sheriff Zimmerman won't know what hit him. It's not a real wedding, Penelope reminded her, though her racing heart seemed to have forgotten that fact. Of course not, Mrs. Reynolds agreed, her eyes twinkling. Just a legal formality. They made their way to the small church at the edge of town. Reverend Jones, a kindly man with a shock of white hair, was waiting for them with Blake and his deputy, a young man named Harris, who would serve as witness. Blake stood at the altar in his best clothes, a dark suit with a string tie, his sheriff's badge polished to a shine. When he saw Penelope, his eyes widened, and he seemed to forget to breathe for a moment. You look beautiful, he whispered as she took her place beside him. Thank you, she replied, suddenly shy. You're quite handsome yourself. The ceremony was brief, just the essential words and the signing of the document that would legally bind them as husband and wife. When Reverend Jones pronounced them married, Blake hesitated for just a moment before leaning down to place a gentle, chaste kiss on Penelope's lips. It was nothing more than a brush of contact, but it sent a shiver down her spine. Congratulations, Mrs. Zimmerman, he said softly. The name startled her. She hadn't considered that part, that she would take his name, even temporarily. They left the church to find several townspeople had gathered outside, having heard the news. There were cheers and well wishes, and Penelope was touched by the genuine warmth shown by these people who barely knew her. Word travels fast in a small town, Blake murmured, his hand at the small of her back as they made their way through the crowd. Do they know it's not real? She asked under her breath. They know Holloway's after you. They've drawn their own conclusions about our sudden marriage. He guided her toward the sheriff's office. I've arranged for us to stay at my place for now. It's small, but it's across from the office, so I can keep an eye on things. Penelope nodded, suddenly nervous at the thought of sharing a home with Blake, even if their arrangement was purely for protection. Blake's house was indeed small, just 2 rooms, a main living area with a kitchen and a separate bedroom. It was sparsely furnished but neat and clean. You take the bedroom, he said, setting down her small bag of belongings that Mrs. Reynolds had packed for her. I'll sleep out here. I can't take your bed. You can and you will, he insisted. What kind of husband would I be if I made my wife sleep on a pallet by the stove? His teasing tone made her smile, easing the awkwardness between them. A practical one, since this isn't actually a marriage. Maybe not, he agreed, his expression turning serious. But it is a promise to protect you, and I take my promises seriously, Penelope. The way he said her name sent another of those shivers through her. I know you do, And I'm grateful, Blake, more than I can say." They settled into an uneasy routine over the next day. Blake went about his duties as sheriff while Penelope remained at the house, cooking and cleaning to keep herself occupied. Deputy Harris kept watch outside when Blake was away, and Mrs. Reynolds visited with supplies and company. It was late afternoon on the second day of their marriage when the trouble came. Penelope was sweeping the front porch when she saw a cloud of dust rising from the road that led into town. As it drew nearer, she made out a group of riders, Holloway at the lead, followed by at least 6 men. She dropped the broom and hurried to the sheriff's office across the street. Blake was at his desk, reviewing wanted posters. "They're coming," she said breathlessly. "Holloway and his men." Blake was on his feet instantly. "Get Deputy Harris and go back to the house. Lock the doors and stay away from the windows." "Blake, there are at least 7 of them." "I know." He checked his pistol and grabbed a shotgun from the rack on the wall. "Don't worry, I won't face them alone." As if on cue, the door opened, and several men from town entered: the blacksmith, Mr. Wilson the cattle broker, old Ferguson the miner, and 3 cowboys Penelope recognized from the boarding house. "Saw Holloway's gang riding in," the blacksmith, a mountain of a man named Peterson, said. "Figured you might want some company, Sheriff." Blake nodded gratefully. "Much obliged, gentlemen." Penelope looked at the determined faces of these men who had come to stand with Blake, to stand with her, a virtual stranger. "Why are you all doing this?" Ferguson spat a stream of tobacco juice into the spittoon before answering. "Because the sheriff's a good man who's always stood up for us, and because no decent folk let a woman get handed over to the likes of Victor Holloway." "Now go on, Mrs. Zimmerman," Wilson urged. "We'll handle this." Penelope hesitated, then quickly kissed Blake's cheek. "Be careful," she whispered. "Always am," he replied with a wink that did little to hide his concern. From the window of Blake's house, Penelope and Deputy Harris watched as Holloway and his men rode into the center of town. They dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, where Blake and the townsmen were waiting. Though she couldn't hear the words, she could see the confrontation unfold. Holloway gestured angrily, pointing toward the house where she hid. Blake stood his ground, showing what appeared to be their marriage certificate. Holloway's face contorted with rage, and his hand moved toward his gun. "No," Penelope gasped. But before Holloway could draw, the townsmen moved closer, their hands on their weapons. It was clear that any violence would come at a steep price. After a tense standoff, Holloway backed down, his body language still radiating fury. He mounted his horse and, with a final threatening gesture toward Blake, led his men out of town. "They're leaving," Deputy Harris said with relief. But Penelope wasn't convinced. "For now, but he'll be back. He's not the type to give up easily." Her prediction proved correct sooner than expected. That night, as Penelope prepared for bed, she heard a noise at the back window of the bedroom. Before she could call out, the glass shattered and 2 men climbed through. One grabbed her, clamping a hand over her mouth to muffle her scream. "Make a sound and we'll kill the sheriff," he hissed in her ear. Penelope bit down hard on his hand. As he cursed and loosened his grip, she screamed Blake's name at the top of her lungs. The second man struck her across the face, sending her sprawling onto the bed. "Shut her up," he growled. The first man lunged for her again, but Penelope rolled away, grabbing the oil lamp from the bedside table and hurling it at him. It shattered against his chest, the oil soaking his shirt and igniting from the flame. He screamed, batting wildly at the flames as they spread. The bedroom door crashed open and Blake appeared, his gun drawn. He fired once, hitting the second man in the shoulder. The burning man crashed back through the window he'd entered, rolling in the dirt outside to extinguish the flames. "Penelope." Blake rushed to her side, checking her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" "I'm all right," she assured him, though her cheek throbbed where she'd been struck. Outside, there was shouting and the sound of more gunfire. Deputy Harris called from the front of the house. "Sheriff, we've got more of them out here." "Stay down," Blake ordered, moving to the doorway. He fired twice more before ducking back as bullets splintered the door frame. Penelope crawled to the dresser where she knew Blake kept a second pistol. She'd grown up learning to shoot, a necessary skill for a woman on the frontier, and though she had never fired at a person, she knew how to handle the weapon. "Here," she said, sliding the gun across the floor to Blake. "You might need this." He gave her a surprised look before nodding his thanks. "They're trying to burn us out," he said grimly. "The curtains in the front room are on fire." As if to confirm his words, smoke began to drift into the bedroom. Penelope coughed, pulling her nightgown up to cover her nose and mouth. "We need to get out," Blake said, "but they'll be waiting." Penelope thought quickly. The trapdoor to the root cellar, is it still there? She had noticed it earlier when cleaning, a small door in the kitchen floor that led to a storage space below the house. Yes, and it connects to old mining tunnels that run under part of the town. Blake's eyes lit up with understanding. "If we can reach it." Another volley of shots peppered the house. The smoke was getting thicker, and Penelope could see the orange glow of flames reflecting on the walls. "Go," Blake said, positioning himself to provide covering fire. "I'll be right behind you." Penelope crawled on her hands and knees through the thickening smoke toward the kitchen. She could hear Blake exchanging shots with Holloway's men, buying her time. The heat was intense, and burning debris was falling from the ceiling. She reached the trapdoor and pulled it open, revealing a dark hole with a ladder leading down. "Blake," she called. "Hurry!" He appeared through the smoke, backing toward her while still firing at the windows. "Go down, I'll follow." Penelope descended the ladder into the cool darkness of the cellar. Moments later, Blake joined her, closing the trapdoor above them just as a section of the burning roof collapsed onto the kitchen floor. "There's a lantern down here somewhere," Blake said, his voice muffled in the close space. She heard him moving around, then the scratch of a match, and a warm glow illuminated the small cellar. "This way," he said, pointing to a rough-hewn tunnel at the far end. "These old mining tunnels connect to several buildings in town. We can come up in the bank 2 streets over." They made their way through the narrow tunnel, Penelope holding Blake's hand as he led her through the darkness beyond the lantern's reach. After what seemed like an eternity of walking in the damp, close space, they came to another ladder. "This leads up to the bank's storeroom," Blake explained. "The banker, Mr. Phillips, is a friend. We'll be safe there until we can figure out our next move." They emerged into a small, windowless room filled with ledgers and bank supplies. Blake helped Penelope up, then closed the trapdoor behind them, covering it with a rug. "What now?" Penelope asked, suddenly aware that she was still in her nightgown, with no shoes or coat. Blake removed his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. "Now we get word to Deputy Harris and the others. Holloway's gone too far this time, arson and attempted murder. Even his money won't protect him from those charges. But we need proof it was him. We have proof. The man you shot is one of his ranch hands, and I recognized at least 2 others in the attack." Penelope leaned against a shelf, suddenly exhausted. The events of the night caught up with her, and she began to tremble uncontrollably. "Hey," Blake said softly, pulling her into his arms. "It's all right. You're safe now." She pressed her face against his chest, breathing in his scent, gunpowder, leather, and something uniquely him. "I thought they were going to kill you. Takes more than a few of Holloway's thugs to bring me down." His attempt at lightness faded as he looked down at her. "You were incredibly brave back there." "I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you act despite the fear." He touched her bruised cheek gently. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better. You did protect me. We protected each other." She looked up into his eyes, seeing something there that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Blake, the door to the storeroom opened, and Mr. Phillips, the banker, stood there in his nightclothes, a shotgun in his hands. "Sheriff, is that you?" "It's me, Phillips," Blake confirmed, stepping slightly away from Penelope but keeping a protective arm around her shoulders. "Sorry to intrude like this, but we had trouble at my place." "I heard the commotion," Phillips said, lowering his shotgun. "Half the town's awake. They're saying Holloway's men set fire to your house." "They did more than that. They tried to kidnap Mrs. Zimmerman and kill me." Phillips shook his head in disgust. "What can I do to help? We need a safe place to stay until morning, and if you have any clothes Mrs. Zimmerman could borrow." "Of course. My daughter's things should fit her well enough, and you're welcome to our guest room for as long as you need it." As they followed Phillips through the darkened bank to his adjoining home, Penelope held tightly to Blake's hand. The night's events had changed something between them. This arrangement, begun as a matter of protection and legality, had become something more, something real and tangible that neither of them had expected. By morning, the news of the attack had spread throughout Deming. Blake's house was a smoldering ruin, but the townspeople had rallied to catch several of Holloway's men, who were now locked in the jail. Holloway himself had disappeared, presumably fleeing back to his ranch. Blake organized a posse to ride out to Silver Creek Ranch, but when they arrived, they found the place deserted. Holloway had fled, taking what valuables he could carry. "He won't get far," Blake assured Penelope when he returned. They were sitting in the parlor of the Phillips home, where they had been given temporary refuge. "I've sent telegrams to every town within 100 miles. His description is in the hands of every lawman in the territory. What if he comes back?" Penelope couldn't shake the fear that had settled in her bones. "What if he tries again?" Blake took her hands in his. "Then we'll be ready. But I don't think he will. He's a coward at heart, and now he's a wanted man. He'll keep running." Penelope wasn't convinced, but she nodded anyway. "What happens now? With us, I mean." Blake's expression grew serious. "That depends on you. The danger that brought us together is gone or will be soon. If you want to end our arrangement, I understand. I can arrange for the annulment just as we discussed. And if I don't want that?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. His eyes widened slightly. "Penelope, these past days, despite all the danger, or perhaps because of it, I've come to know you in a way I never expected. You're a good man, Blake Zimmerman. A brave, honorable man who was willing to risk everything to protect a stranger." She took a deep breath. "And somewhere along the way, I realized I was falling in love with you." The silence that followed her confession seemed endless. Then Blake raised a hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle against her bruised skin. "I never believed in love at first sight," he said softly. "But from the moment you stumbled into Deming, something inside me knew you were special. I told myself I was just doing my duty, protecting someone who needed help. But last night, when I thought I might lose you—" He shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "I knew then that what I felt was far more than duty or responsibility. So what do we do?" Penelope asked, hardly daring to hope. "We could start by making this marriage real," Blake suggested. "Not just on paper, but in every way, if that's what you want." "It's what I want," she whispered. "More than anything." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of the future they would build together, a future neither of them had imagined when fate had brought them together just days ago. 3 weeks later, word reached Deming that Victor Holloway had been captured trying to board a ship in Galveston, Texas. He would stand trial for his crimes, facing years in prison if convicted. With that news, the last shadow lifted from Penelope's new life. The town had rallied around the couple, helping to rebuild Blake's house, expanding it to a proper family home. Mrs. Reynolds had insisted on hosting a real wedding celebration, since their first ceremony had been so hastily arranged. And so, on a bright spring day, Penelope Foster Zimmerman once again stood before Reverend Jones, this time in a proper wedding gown that Mrs. Reynolds and the other women of Deming had worked together to create. Blake, handsome in his new suit, looked at her with such love that it brought tears to her eyes. "I believe you two have already exchanged the official vows," Reverend Jones said with a smile. "But perhaps you have words of your own to share today." Blake took Penelope's hands in his. "When you came to Deming, you told me that your father had sold you to pay a debt. I said then that I would pay heaven to keep you. I meant it. Every day with you is worth more than all the gold in these mountains. I love you, Penelope, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it." Penelope blinked back tears as she replied, "I came to Deming with nothing but fear and desperation. You gave me safety, respect, and eventually, love. You showed me what a good man truly is. I thought I had lost everything, but in reality, I was about to find everything I never knew I needed. I love you, Blake Zimmerman, and I will be grateful every day that fate brought me to your town and into your life." This time when Reverend Jones pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was not brief or chaste, but full of the passion and love that had grown between them. The church erupted in cheers and applause as they made their way down the aisle into the bright sunshine of a new beginning. In the years that followed, Deming grew and prospered, as did the Zimmerman family. Blake continued to serve as sheriff, respected and admired throughout the territory. Penelope, no longer defined by her father's sins, became a pillar of the community, establishing a school where she taught the children of miners, cowboys, and townspeople alike. They built a life filled with love, respect, and the kind of partnership that legends are made of. And when their children asked how they had met, they told the story of a desperate young woman, an honorable lawman, and a promise that had been worth every sacrifice. "Then, I'll pay heaven to keep you." Their love story became part of Deming's folklore, a testament to the fact that even in the wild, lawless days of the frontier, true love could flourish in the most unexpected circumstances. And though the West would eventually be tamed, the legend of Sheriff Blake Zimmerman and the woman he had vowed to protect at any cost would be told for generations to come, a reminder that some things, like love and honor, never change, no matter how the world around them might. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch of their home watching their 3 children play in the yard, Penelope turned to Blake with a smile. "You ever regret it? Marrying a woman you barely knew to save her from a scoundrel?" Blake laughed, taking her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Best decision I ever made, though I still maintain it wasn't a complete act of nobility." "No?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "No, I think I started falling for you the moment you collapsed in my arms outside the Blue Cactus Saloon. I just didn't recognize it yet." Penelope leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as their oldest son helped his younger sister climb the apple tree they had planted the year after their wedding. "I'm glad you didn't," she said softly. "Because then I might have suspected you were just another man trying to claim me, rather than the hero you truly were." "Not a hero," he corrected. "Just a man who recognized something worth fighting for." As the sun set over Deming, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Penelope thought of all the twists of fate that had brought her to this moment: her father's betrayal, Holloway's cruelty, and above all, the steadfast love of a man who had been willing to pay any price to keep her safe. Sometimes, she reflected, The darkest paths led to the brightest destinations. And in the end, the price of heaven had been nothing compared to the paradise they had built together.